I was folding towels when I overheard them. Kara's voice was sharper than usual, slicing through the hallway. "She's still here, Levi. How long are we supposed to live like this?" He didn't answer right away. Just the low thud of a cabinet shutting the scrape of a drawer. I stayed still in the laundry room, hands pressed flat on the towel in front of me. My knee ached from standing too long, but I didn't sit down. Not yet. That night at dinner, Kara hardly spoke. Levi pushed his food around with his fork like he was stalling. Then just as I reached to refill his glass, he cleared his throat. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "It's not working." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He didn't meet my eyes. "You're a burden, Mom." No anger in his voice. Just a quiet finality. Kara didn't flinch. She'd already stood and taken her plate to the sink. I nodded slowly. "I see." He walked me to the front door. My suitcase was already there, zipped and upright, waiting like it had known before I did. The porch light flickered overhead. I stepped outside into the night chill, careful with my knee. He didn't hug me goodbye. Just said, "Take care." Then the door clicked shut. Locked. I stood there for a moment, the porch light buzzing faintly behind me. I wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, that I'd get a call in the morning, that Kara had pushed him too far, and he'd regret it. Instead, I texted my friend Meredith and asked if her couch was still free. She didn't ask questions, just sent an address and said I'll leave the porch light on. By the time I got there, my knee was swollen and the couch cushions were sunken from use. But it was warm, quiet. No one looked at me like I was in the way. I didn't sleep much. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out when everything had shifted so far, I couldn't feel the floor anymore. The next morning, I limped to the corner pharmacy to refill my prescription. I passed a familiar street sign and paused. 2 days later, I took the bus to the other side of town. Not to go back, but to see at their house. The one Levi built 6 years ago on the land my husband and I bought in 1989, back when we still believed in front porches and fruit trees. We'd held on to that lot for decades. It was nothing special, just a narrow parcel at the end of Alder Lane, but it was paid off, and it was ours. After my husband died, I left it untouched. Then Levi lost his second job and moved back in with me, angry at the world, convinced he could do better if someone just gave him a chance. So I did. I offered him the land. Not the deed, just the opportunity. I even pitched in my savings to help him qualify for a construction loan. "Just until you're steady," I'd said. "Then you can take it from there." He built the house. I helped furnish it. And eventually, he stopped calling it ours. Now, standing across the street, I watched the blinds twitch shut as I passed. The grass was overgrown. The porch light flickered like it hadn't been fixed in weeks. I didn't knock. Instead, I walked the few extra blocks to the bank where we'd handled the paperwork. I asked the clerk to check the records on the property part of me, already knowing what she'd find. "You're not listed on the house structure anymore," she said, scrolling. It was updated months ago. I waited until the morning to call him. Part of me hoped there'd be an apology waiting, some explanation that made all of this feel like a mistake instead of a choice. But when Levi answered, he sounded calm. Too calm. "I saw the deed," I said. "You took my name off." He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, Kara and I talked about it. It's better this way." "Cleaner." "Cleaner," I repeated. He sighed like I was being unreasonable. "It just avoids confusion down the line. Legally, it's less complicated." I was quiet for a moment. So after everything, I'm just erased. He didn't respond. The silence between us said enough. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. An hour later, Kara texted, "Please respect our boundaries. This isn't healthy for anyone." As if I'd crossed some line by asking why they'd erased me from the house I helped them build. By the end of the week, I'd signed a lease on a one-room studio across from an auto shop. The walls were yellowed, and the heater worked when it felt like it. I paid the deposit in cash and kept the receipt folded inside my wallet, where my hands kept finding it, like it was proof I still existed somewhere. The cold made my knee throb most nights. The hallway smelled like damp carpet. I kept to myself, but the woman 2 doors down, Nadine, saw me limping one morning and offered me a ride to the pharmacy. "You might want to check out the pantry on 9th, she said. "They don't ask too many questions." I smiled and thanked her, but the words lodged somewhere in my throat. I'd never needed charity before. I'd always been the one packing donation boxes, not the one on the receiving end. That night, I sat at the small table by the window eating soup from a can, watching traffic pass. Not a single message from Levi. Not even to check if I had a place to sleep. I pulled the old folder back out and laid everything on the table. Something in me had shifted. Quietly, but completely. The folder was heavier than I remembered. Thick manila, the corners softened from years in the back of the drawer. My husband had labeled it in his blocky handwriting, "Property and Notes." Keep. I hadn't looked at it in years, but now every rustle of the papers inside felt different. I sorted through old receipts, faded copies of contracts, a few annotated pages, with his notes in red pen. And then near the back, I found what I hadn't realized. I'd been looking for: the original land parcel agreements. Signed by both of us. Witnessed. Stamped. I stared at the signatures. His name. My name. No Levi. The next morning I called Miriam. She'd been our lawyer when we refinanced the house after my husband's illness, and she still worked at the same office downtown. She remembered me right away. "Bring everything," she said. "Let's take a look." I did. She spread the documents across her desk, her brows drawn together as she read. "You said your name is no longer on the deed to the house," she asked. I nodded. "Removed." Quietly. She tapped a page. "Well, he may have managed that with the structure, especially if you gave him written consent at any point. But here's the catch." Her finger moved to another section. "This parcel, this land. It's still under your name. The dirt, Lorraine. The actual ground it's sitting on." I sat back in the chair. "It's legal?" I asked. She nodded. "It's completely legal. He may own the building, but you own what it stands on." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the copy she slid toward me. My name, clear as ever, printed beneath the words, "Primary land title holder." It wasn't revenge, I felt. Not yet. It was clarity. All those years I spent making sure Levi had solid ground beneath him, I never thought that ground might one day be mine in a different way. Miriam looked up. "We can move forward whenever you're ready." I gathered the papers carefully, as if something fragile had been rebuilt. And I told her I was ready. The name came to me over coffee. LM Real Properties. It sounded simple, clean, no trace of sentiment. Miriam helped me file the paperwork, one form at a time, no rush. We used the land deed I still held, and through a quiet legal mechanism she described as land to structure integration, I purchased the parcel under my own LLC. In doing so, I absorbed the structure sitting on top of it. Not stolen, not seized, just reclaimed the way someone might quietly retrieve a jacket loaned out too long. We didn't notify Levi. There was no need. The transaction moved through the county records like any other. The lease went out 2 days later. I sat at my small table sealing the certified envelope myself. No message inside, no personal note, just a legally binding rental agreement from LM Real Properties, addressed to Levi and Kara Mercer. It listed their address, their full names, monthly rent $4.250, due on the 1st of every month, a 10-day grace period, followed by a penalty fee, a clause on eviction for failure to pay. Miriam had suggested $3,800. I made it $4,250. Not because I wanted to bleed them, but because that was the exact mortgage payment they once told me was impossible without help. They had made it my problem then. Now it was theirs. I sent it through the post office in person and kept the receipt. Then I walked home and sat on the edge of my bed staring at nothing. My knee ached, but I didn't notice it much anymore. What I felt instead was a kind of stillness, like standing on dry ground after months of drifting. That evening, I pulled out my old planner and crossed off a name under emergency contacts. The next morning, I checked the tracking confirmation. Delivered 11:14 a.m. They would have seen it by now. Kara would be pacing. Levi would be angry, but I wasn't thinking about either of them. I was thinking about the lawn. It hadn't been mowed in weeks. That I'd fix first. The first message came 2 days after the letter was delivered. Levi's voice clipped and sharp. "Very funny, Mom. We got your little joke. You almost had Kara believing it." Then nothing for a week. I waited. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I let the silence do the talking. The second message was quieter. "I called the county office," he said. "They said LM Real Properties owns the land. That can't be right." It was. They'd never bothered to check the structure to land clause when they removed my name. Never thought I'd remember what was mine. I heard nothing else for a few days until Kara called. Not to apologize. Just to panic. "We can't afford this," she said, her voice shaking. "We still owe on the house. The mortgage, the bills were barely keeping up. Please, Lorraine, be reasonable." Reasonable. That was the word she used when they moved my things without asking. When they shut the door behind me, I didn't return the call. Instead, I hired a landscaping company for the block. Clean mulch beds, fresh paint, tidy porches. I paid extra for same-week service on the rentals I now controlled. All of them got new mailboxes, new fences. Some were due for it anyway. All except one. Levi's lawn stayed wild. Paint flaked at the corners of their porch. The gutter sagged. I wasn't being spiteful. I just followed the lease agreement. No landlord assistance without payment. Another voicemail landed on my phone late that Thursday. Levi again. "You're being cruel," he said. "You think this makes you strong? You think punishing your own family makes you better than us?" I deleted it without listening to the end. That weekend, I sat with Miriam to go over late payment protocol. She asked if I wanted to post a notice immediately. I said no. Let's wait a few days. Let them think. Let them wonder how far I was willing to go for my silence. And then, when they stopped wondering and started fearing, I would begin. By the third missed payment, Kara was gone. I heard it from a neighbor who managed one of the other units. Said she'd seen Kara load 2 suitcases into her sister's car and drive off without looking back. The blinds in their living room stayed drawn for days after that. No light, no sound, just stillness. Levi started calling again soon after. The first message came late. His voice slurred. "You win, Mom. You always have to win." He hung up before finishing the thought. The next one came an hour later. Louder this time. "You think you're better than me? You think this makes you right?" His words stumbled over themselves, tangled in drink and anger. I deleted it halfway through. By the third call, he didn't bother hiding it anymore. "I know it was you," he said, voice low and steady. "I know what you did." I stared at the screen until the call ended. Then I blocked the number. 2 nights later, I saw him. Outside my apartment building. His car idled under the streetlight windows, fogged from the cold. He didn't try to come up, just sat there watching. Long enough for me to notice, long enough for my pulse to start racing the way it used to when he was a boy, when a fever wouldn't break, and I stayed awake, counting breaths. But this wasn't that kind of fear. I called Miriam the next morning. She didn't hesitate. "File for protection," she said. "You don't have to wait for something to happen." So I did. The papers went through within days. A restraining order. A quiet wall between us. It wasn't satisfaction that followed, just a dull relief. The kind that settles into your bones when you finally stop waiting for someone to love you the way you once imagined they could. When I got home that night, I checked the mailbox. Among the usual letters sat a single envelope from the court, confirmation that everything was official. I slipped it into the same folder that had started all this. The eviction notice was sent by courier just like everything else. A copy was filed with the court, one delivered to Levi's door, and one posted visibly on the edge of the property. It was official, final, irrefutable. I didn't expect him to go quietly, and he didn't. He filed an objection through a low-level firm downtown, tried to claim duress, family hardship, and something about moral rights. But the paperwork didn't care about feelings. The lease was binding. The payment history was blank. The land title uncontested. When the hearing date arrived, I didn't bring anyone with me. I didn't need to. Miriam had already prepared every folder, organized every clause. Levi sat 2 rows ahead, shoulders hunched, flipping through loose pages that couldn't help him now. His lawyer started strong, confident even. But by the halfway point, she paused, whispered something to him, and then asked the judge for a recess she didn't intend to return from. I watched Levi sit there alone, his hands clenched in his lap. I didn't look away. But I didn't look through him either. When it was over, the judge ruled in my favor without hesitation. Immediate vacancy, no extensions. Outside the steps of the courthouse gleamed under the pale winter sun. I took my time walking down them. My knee ached a little, but it held steady. Levi was waiting near the curb. "Mom," he said, stepping forward, one hand slightly raised, like maybe this time he had something different to say. I stopped, but only for a second. I turned my face away, stepped around him and kept walking. No words. No glance back. He didn't follow. I reached the corner before exhaling. The wind caught at my coat, and I pulled it tighter, not from cold, but from the weight of it all. Back at home, I poured a glass of water and opened the window. The neighborhood was quiet. In the distance, I could hear a lawnmower humming along, trimming what others had let grow wild. The house sat on the edge of town, just far enough from the traffic to be quiet, but close enough to watch the seasons shift through the trees lining the road. It was smaller than any place I'd lived before, but it caught sunlight in the afternoons, and the porch was wide enough for 2 chairs and a wind chime that clicked gently in the breeze. I moved in with only what I needed. A few books, a kettle, the soft green blanket from my mother's old cedar chest, and Rocco, my 1-year-old rescue mutt, who barked at birds like they were burglars. The shelter said he'd been left behind in a move. I told him I knew what that felt like. The sign went up 3 days after I unpacked the last box. I staked it myself right at the corner of the lawn, painted in simple block letters. Mercer House Long-Term Rentals. No exceptions. It wasn't about rules. It was about boundaries. And claiming space finally, without apology. My LLC handled the rest of the block now. 5 properties in total. 4 occupied, 1 always left vacant, not for profit, but for breath. Sometimes people need somewhere to land before they can stand. I managed them all from a desk by the window. The mail came in every week, checks neatly folded. Sometimes there were notes. Thanks for fixing the sink so fast. Appreciate the new light out back. Nothing grand, but real. Grateful. I planted hydrangeas along the fence and replaced the broken gate latch myself. Every few days, someone walking by would wave. Some of them didn't know my name. That didn't matter. One morning, I opened the mailbox and found an envelope addressed in Levi's handwriting. Just my name, no return address. I turned it over in my hands a few times, then set it aside. Not unread, but unopened. That afternoon I made tea and sat on the porch with Rocco curled at my feet. A breeze swept across the yard. The wind chime rang once light hollow and then stilled. The months passed without incident. Winter eased its grip, and the trees along the street began to bloom again. Rent checks came in neatly sealed, and on time, each one logged and filed away with a quiet sense of order. None were from Levi. It was Nadine who told me. She'd taken over light maintenance for the block part-time. She'd gone to check the meter and found the place empty. Looked like they left in a hurry, she said. No boxes, just gone. No forwarding address, no email, no call. At first, I thought maybe he'd come back to explain. Maybe knock on the door or send another letter, one with more than just my name on the envelope. But the knock never came. Neither did an apology, and over time the waiting unraveled itself from me, thread by thread. I dusted the bookshelf one afternoon and found the small silver frame behind a row of paperbacks, one of the few photos I'd kept after everything. Levi at 10, smiling up at a kite in the sky, his arms still soft with childhood. I looked at it for a long time before turning it face down and sliding it into the drawer. Not as an ending, just a pause I no longer needed to fill. That night, I took Rocco for a walk along the gravel path behind the house. The air smelled faintly of rain, and the streetlights blinked to life one by one. There was no anger left in me. No ache. Just space. Just breath. When we got home, I made tea and sat on the porch again, the same place I'd been that first day when the silence felt like grief. Now, it just felt like mine. Rocco rested his head on my feet, and I reached down to scratch behind his ear. He sighed deep and content. Some good things I've learned don't make noise when they arrive. They just settle in and stay.